so I think the trust and authenticity that you can get from live events is in contraindication in reality to AI. That's not to say it's not a really useful tool, because it absolutely is. But I don't believe that AI will ever replace the creativity of great events.
Hello and welcome to the meeting room. I'm Paul Harvey. Now, what if your next event could do more than just inform or entertain? What if it could truly transform you or your client's business, your audience, and your impacts? Now, I'm joined on the meeting room today by Sasha Frieze, who knows an awful lot about that because she's just written a book about that. Welcome to the show, Sasha.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's great to be here.
Now, you've just written the Chief Event Officer's Playbook, How to Create Transformational Events. You've been writing for 2 years, is that right?
Well, this version of the book has taken me around 2 years. I actually met my editor around 7 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And we both agreed that I probably had a book in me. And, when we talked about different ideas, and I spent quite a long time, in a way I was refining my ideas, focusing on what wasn't quite the right thing. But then, like January 24, the kind of idea of the Chief Event Officer's Playbook came to me. And I realised that the event transformation blueprint, which is kind of that model, that 10-step model that I created, synthesizes my kind of 30 years of experience putting together events. And it just kind of came together once I had the right idea.
And so it's your first book, and it has more than 30 years of events expertise and knowledge in it. It's going to be worth reading for a lot of our audience, I'd say. But the main thrust of the book then is how to create transformational events. So can you explain what a transformational event is and maybe why it's so important?
It seems to me that events can do more than just be a great party. Every so often people, I hear people saying, oh, my boss said, you're just a party planner. That's not what I think business and professional events are about. And it's increasingly what I see in the market. And so I believe that there are 3 transformations that events can create. And the best events have this in mind. They have a kind of strategic purpose in mind. And whether that's a transformation for individuals, I am changed by coming, say, to the meeting show. I arrive in the morning, I'm a certain person, but the experiences I have, the people I talk to, the sessions that I listen to, the conversations that I have, the relationships that I make, I am transformed. I'm changed by the end of the day. But that change, that transformation, it can be for individuals, it can be for organizations. It's certainly the case with many corporates. They have an agenda in terms of what their event is about. And so that what one wants to do is ideally create that intentional transformation, design it into the event. And then the big transformation is transformations for sectors. So if we take the events industry, some of the really, some of those big events, IMEX, IBTM, I believe that they have, by convening tens of thousands of people in the sector, they actually have a transformational impact on the sector.
Wow. And so your book is about how to do that, how to get that special sauce and get it into your own events. Is that right?
Yes, there's a 10-step blueprint, and it's really a framework. It's not exactly a rule book. I think every event is different, and it's for people to kind of take and leave the bits that work for them. But it's about starting with the 4 big questions and starting with, why are you doing this event? That's part of the transformation piece. So what is that transformation? What journey are you going to take people on? And crucially, what is the purpose of your event? So kind of articulating those 3 questions into a kind of purpose proposition. And having that up front really helps people navigate, and it kind of helps your whole team. Whether that is the sales team or the content team or the marketing team or even the operations team, when you've got clarity of purpose of what the event's trying to achieve, it's easier for everybody in the team to kind of work out what they need to be doing next.
In the book, the book is called the Chief Event Officer's Playbook. And so that title, Chief Event Officer, is that something you believe that every organisation should have?
I think time will tell whether every organisation has a chief event officer, but I certainly hope that very many people with the 102, the guys who did the research at ICE, Anita Howard and her team came up with, I think, 102
Yeah,
job
no, I
titles.
saw that research. That's an amazing bit of research,
So
isn't
whatever
it?
your job title, whether
Yeah.
you're an event planner or an event marketing manager or an event product manager or whatever your role, I believe that people can take on that chief event officer mindset and bring a strategic aspect to how they create their events. Nobody really gets promoted for however, I'm taking logistics, great operational logistics for granted. It seems to me that if event planners, event organisers, event directors were running the world, we might not be in the mess we're in now. We know that our industry is really brilliant at logistics and operations and making things work. And what I hope the book does is help people, take a step back, which there isn't always time to do in everyday busy life planning events, but to take a step back and think more strategically. And so for people to raise their own game and take on that kind of chief event officer's mindset. No one gets promoted for knowing how many croissants to order or, doing a really great RFP. However important those things are, I do not in any way diss the great stuff that my events, operations and logistics colleagues do. This is a kind of additional aspect, the strategic approach.
They're kind of bringing a unique perspective to shaping events then, are they?
The chief event officer.
Yeah.
So I believe that the chief event officer has that overview. I sort of think of the chief event officer in a way as a kind of conductor of the orchestra of event professionals. And what's brilliant about event people in every organisation is that, they know all the different departments. Events professionals know they have great relationships with marketing. Very often they sit within marketing, but in sales, in product, in operations, logistics, in finance. And so I believe that the chief event officer has that overview, has that kind of strategic overview that can really help guide the whole team and also work across the whole organisation to ensure that the events that are designed, curated, deliver genuine impact. They are thoughtfully, intentionally created, to have that clarity of transformation, of journey, of purpose, and then to ask those questions about, who's going to be in the room, really deeply exploring, mapping out your market, who's your target audience, how are you going to create that audience, and then also thinking about the messaging and marketing piece on top of that. It's only then that you get to the what is the event bit.
One of the things that I found really interesting was you've got a little kind of chart about how events have changed over time, because obviously you've kind of like you've seen events change over time from the 90s to the noughties. How have they? Can you just tell us a bit about how they have changed over time?
I mean, I think in the 80s and 90s, events were very much a product. In fact, my first events industry role was working for IIR, which is now sort of subsumed into Informa. Irving Laidlaw, who was one of the kind of grandfathers of the events industry, there wasn't even event branding. All the events looked the same. There were only a handful of conference companies and everybody's brochures, paper brochures, look the same. I became an expert at negotiating, printing tens of thousands of 4-page A4 brochures. But they were very much a product. They weren't particularly differentiated from anyone else. It was content-led because there wasn't anywhere else to get content. So the kind of content that you could easily find on the internet now, that it was very much a product. Then to some degree it became an experience. And I think there was a customer service element, looking after speakers, looking after participants, making sure they had a great time. And so that customer service element came. But then I think, we sort of moved on to the experience economy. And I think especially after Joe Pine's book, of which I'm a huge fan, 1999, his new book is coming out next year, The Transformation Economy, which aligns quite neatly with my ideas. He was very generous to me with his time, actually, when I was researching the book. That experience economy piece was really big. And I think that we have seen events develop and become experiences, certainly in consumer events, but I think some of that consumer magic has come into business and professional events. And people are much more thoughtful about creating something that has that emotional connection. I think the pandemic just changed all of that. The pandemic just blew all that up. And so now we have the advantage of learning all those kind of technical skills to have, hybrid events, but, recording, online, digital stuff. And there's a an aspect of that for every event. But actually, nowadays, I believe in the last 5 years, to get people excited to leave their home or office or WeWork or wherever they do, or coffee shop or wherever they do their work, an event has to be truly transformational. You need to be able to show somebody how it's going to change them, how it's going to affect them, who are they going to meet there, what kind of conversations are they going to have. And so I think, since those early days of just a product, it's really got to, how do transformational events change people and organisations?
Presumably, it's going to change further after this, but that's the era that we're in.
That might be the next bit. But
I was just wondering, do you see AI as being transformational for events?
AI is part of everybody's workflow. Now, there's no question about that. And there are absolutely lots of tools and strategies for people to improve all the very many ways that event organisers put together events. Live events are completely they are the flip side of the coin from AI, because AI is, inauthentic. I believe that live events are where people can have really authentic conversations. We are live in person talking to each other. When somebody is at a trade show or a corporate event or an association event, those are real conversations that have AI taken out of it. And so I think the trust and authenticity that you can get from live events is in contraindication in reality to AI. That's not to say it's not a really useful tool, because it absolutely is. And everybody is speeding up their workflow and, doing deeper, potentially better research. But I don't believe that AI will ever replace the creativity of great events. But the magic of creativity, and I see a lot of creativity in event design, in event content curation, that comes from real humans having great creative ideas that nobody's had before. And if nobody's had that idea before, it's not in the large language model.
Exactly, yeah. Events, really, how can they move beyond being a marketing or networking tool to become a driver of revenue and purpose and strategic outcomes? How do they do that?
Look, I think events have a lot, there's a full range of, purpose propositions that organisations or event owners might have for what their events are about. So, in the trade show, commercial conference, media owner world, that's about revenue. The events are a business model in themselves. That's not to say that they can't have real purpose. Revenue doesn't necessarily replace the idea of purpose. And actually, some of the events that I see, commercially driven, revenue generating events that I see that are the most successful, some of them have a purpose element to them, because what they do, so for example, if you think of health, which is a great event franchise, they have a non-profit as part of their organisation. And so a certain degree of the revenue goes into funding, health activities. I think it's in the developing world. And so what they've done really smartly there is take the ideas of convening the whole world who want to talk about the health issues, but they've highlighted that there's a bigger purpose to having that conversation. What are the health inequalities? What are the issues that we can resolve? And let's ensure that a small proportion of the funds that we make goes to contribute to that. And I think when revenue is aligned with purpose, actually everybody wins. So they have a profitable show, brilliantly creative, interestingly done, great convening, brilliant connections, but at the same time they're doing something purposeful. And I think for corporates, their corporate events can very often be about sales and lead generation, but that's not to say you can't build relationships, have really engaging experiences, and also do something purposeful. Purpose. There's a generational shift, so this is only going to carry on happening. So Gen Z are largely of a mindset, it seems from the research I've read, that they actually don't even want to work for an organisation where they're not aligned with the values of that organisation. And so increasingly it's going to be the case, which is good for everyone, right? It's good business to do the right thing. So it's increasingly going to be the case that events may well be about revenue, but have those ideas about, the deeper purpose and how they can help their sector. And the truth is it's a virtuous circle, because in doing that, you get great news coverage because of the cool stuff you've done in your organisation and in your sector, and that long tail, has impact.
Absolutely, yeah. And another thing you talk about in the book is putting attendees first. And I'm just wondering if there are any kind of practical ways to design events that kind of truly connect with participants and create lasting impact.
Now, that's a really good question. I mean, you've picked up on one of the core ideas in the book, actually, which is I take the hero's journey, which is quite a common model that people are aware of from storytelling, the vulgar model, of the hero's journey. So if you think of Harry Potter under the stairs in his ordinary world, and then he has his call to adventure and he goes on a whole journey, and he ultimately returns changed. And I've taken that model and applied it to events because stories move us, like narrative. When you get that email marketing that says, we are delighted to launch our event. We are delighted to tell you about our 127 speakers. We are delighted to tell you about our new sponsors. That data dump about your event doesn't really talk to me. But when you tell me stories, narratives that talk to me as the participant, as the individual attendee, that's really powerful. And so the model that I've built is about putting the participant at the heart of the event from the very moment you do the marketing, in terms of how you welcome them, in terms of the experience they have, and in terms of that lasting impact from the connections they've got as they kind of return to their ordinary life, but hopefully magically changed and with great connections. I mean, we've all had that experience, right, where you come back from an amazing show and you're just buzzing. And you're excited about all the people that you met and the ideas that you learned and the deals that you did and the connections that you made. And that's what putting the participant first does. And what's interesting is when I made that model, I sent out, I know quite a few senior people in the events world, so I sent it to a few people who were MDs of event businesses, and some of them came back to me and said, this is really nice, but it's not our story as the event owner. And I thought, that's an interesting perspective, because it seems to me that everybody wins when you put the participant at the heart of it. Because when everything is about the participant, then the show is really successful, then the sponsors and exhibitors are really happy. So what does that mean? That means everything from making sure the event tech works super well and it's really easy to download my badge. Right, and I don't have to, I went to an event a few months ago where I just couldn't get into the event app. I kept resetting my password, but you want it to be a really slick, CX journey for participants, and you want to guide them through the event. You want to make it really easy for them to find the things that they want, whether that is as simple as color-coded lanyards so that who's a community person and who's a sponsor and who's a speaker, or it might be that you have different categories of participants and it's ways of finding people, to setting up one-on-one networking meetings with the right category of person. It's thinking about the event from the participant's perspective all the way through the event design. And I believe that just has real strategic impact.
So the book includes a 10-step blueprint for next generation event design. So I was just wondering if you could share maybe one or two of the most powerful principles that you think every event professional should embrace right now.
At the beginning of the book is the Event Transformation Blueprint. Oh, yeah. And I will be launching that on stage next week. And so really that's about so there's 4 questions and 10 steps. Why are you doing this event? Those kind of strategic purpose pieces. Who's it for? Who are the stakeholders, and what is the messaging and how are you going to get it out to them? What is the event in terms of the content? Crucially, the experience. I mean, content can mean a whole load of stuff, but experience design, especially for business professional events, when people get that right, it's game-changing, it's magical. one of the big takeaways for me is the welcome. I've done a whole chapter on the welcome in part of that kind of what question. And the reason for that is the welcome really starts the minute somebody registers. As soon as I register, I'm in that like welcome journey. If you then send me like 27 emails telling me stuff about the show, I might feel a bit less welcome and certainly more confused. But the kickoff of the event, the show, whatever it is, that on-stage welcome, can be really powerful. I mean, for a big trade show, the welcome is when you land at the airport and is there a great desk there that, or are you like wandering around with your phone trying to find where to get a taxi? The welcome means a lot of stuff. But I was at a couple of events in the last few weeks, very different. One, a sort of media owner, the other, like a small corporate. But they both did the same thing at the beginning, and I thought it was a lost opportunity. So they both had whoever was welcoming people on stage for the opening, and they come on stage and they say, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the event. Before we start, let me tell you that we're not expecting a fire alarm today. Mm-hmm. Now, let me just check my list. I had a few other things I need to tell you. The toilets are over here, and let me tell you about the Wi-Fi. Now, those are important operational things that you need to communicate to people. There's no question about it. But the big takeaway for me, one of the big ideas, is about getting the welcome right. Because I think you've spent a couple of years or a year or 6 months or 3 months convening the right 30 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 or 5,000 people. And that moment when you walk on stage is really powerful. Let's not waste it. Like, I want you to go back to your event purpose proposition and say, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the European Lawn Manufacturers Association annual gathering. When I was writing the book, I was like, I've come up with something really unique, but there obviously is an association. That's what I love. There's an association of everything. And we are here today to talk about lawnmowers and lawns and make sure that as a community, as a sector, we address the real issues of, environmental challenges, supply chain, what's the impact of tariffs, and crucially, we're here today as a community. So take this opportunity to meet, to connect, to have great conversations. In a moment, I'll cover some of the housekeeping things. But what I want you to do, first off, is just turn to the person next to you and just tell them in a couple of minutes what you want to achieve out of being here today. Now, that's the kind of welcome that gets me really excited because I am included, I'm involved, I feel part of something. And so I think a big takeaway for me, one of the big takeaways of the 10 steps is it was just in very kind of sharp contrast that in a week I went to 2 events that were both brilliant events, in their own ways. But there was this lost opportunity.
And I guess if you had a chief events officer overlooking your event, they'd be able to say, well, we need to take advantage of that opportunity.
No, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. I mean, the chief event officer, the person leading that kind of strategic direction would absolutely be someone who says, this is not an afterthought, right? Let's get it right. This is a big moment.
Yeah.
You might say to everybody, get out your phone, go on Insta if it's if it's a field where people are on Instagram and, take a picture of this screen now with our big question and put it on Insta. Like, you can use the welcome to create the community, to get the questions out there, but it does need that strategic direction.
What have been some of the most transformational events that you've been to over the last 30 years? I don't know if you can think of any events that were particularly kind of did change who you were.
Really great question. 2 come to mind. One's more recent. And it's a personal event rather than a business event, but it has that kind of transformational piece to it, which is I have a group of girlfriends and, we've been going on holiday together for years. One of our friends had a special birthday coming up. And many of us are at a stage where we have families and children, but we created a surprise party for her. It wasn't an enormous surprise because we didn't think she would love an enormous surprise. You always have to think about like your audience. Some people love a surprise, some people don't. So we told her that she was getting together with us, but then we invited some of her other good friends, so it had a surprising element. And we put together a book where everybody sent pictures and wrote nice things about her. And we had a kind of, bring a dish dinner party, and there were 20 people there. It was really magical. I think she felt that maybe people wouldn't remember her birthday. And we celebrated her. And seeing that joy on her face was absolutely brilliant. And I think it was interesting when I was talking to my friends, because they're like, oh, well, you're the Chief Event Officer. But I was bringing everything I've learned about what makes events powerful to creating a memorable moment, for my good friend. So that's one thing. I think in the professional sphere, for very many years, my team were embedded at the ODI, the Open Data Institute, organising all their events and, taking them from important events to really like embedded within the fabric of the organisation. And of course, Tim Berners-Lee founded the Open Data Institute with Nigel Shadbolt, and he opens the event. And so the first year that I did it, my kid is a real geek, and he was about 7 or 8, and I took him out of school to hear Tim Berners-Lee speak. The head teacher was not very happy, and she tried to find me. I'm like, sorry, just tell me in what way this is not educational. He is going to learn so much more hearing Tim Berners-Lee speak than like a whole day of school. And so I took my kid out of school, and I'm obviously like running this event for like 700 people or whatever it is. And someone brought him on site to the event, and he heard Tim speak. And then I said to him, I don't think you're going to meet Tim. But it happened to be that he came into the green room and Tim was there. And I said, would you be okay to have a chat with my son? He's a real geek. And Tim who is very generous. And so my kid had 5 minutes with Tim Berners-Lee.
Wow.
And I honestly think that inspired him. He now does lots of very cool, geeky stuff. And I think, it is those opportunities that happen for people at events. You have that magical connection with someone. People talk about serendipity. Obviously, with huge events, you want to orchestrate that serendipity in some way and leverage technology to do it. But sometimes there can just be those amazingly serendipitous moments, and they are really powerful. And I think, my hope for everyone is that when they leave an event, there's at least one really important conversation. Might be a sales conversation, might be a relationship that will turn into a partnership. It might just be some great person who's on your wavelength and you've just got so much to talk about. But events are about authentic people, trust, live conversations, and those magical moments when people have those connections, that can be really inspiring.
And that's the kind of event that a chief event officer can create with the help of your book, which we should say about the book. So it's not quite out yet, but by the time this podcast goes out, I think it will be out.
Yes, it is out there in the world from the 18th of November.
How do you feel about kind of putting your first book out there in the world?
I'm very excited to kind of see it out there. And I am very hopeful that this can contribute to the conversation about, the events industry is amazing. I love this industry. Like many people, I fell into it. I did not know quite what I was getting into. It is the best thing that ever happened to me. And so I really hope that the book helps other people, bring a more strategic approach to their events, up level, raise their game, talk the language of the boardroom, and hopefully, move onwards and upwards and create great transformational events.
I'm absolutely sure it will do that. Now, thank you very much for joining me on the meeting room today, Sasha, and best of luck with the book. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic.
Thank you. A real great pleasure to be here. Thanks, Paul.